are here with Sir Martin Sorrell, the founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital. Welcome, Sir Martin Sorrell. To start with, can you tell us about your childhood?
Okay, so I was born in northwest London, in what I call the Jewish ghetto in northwest London. I was born in a block of flats called Queensborough Court, which is a place called Henley's Corner, which is near Golders Green, which is the northwest London, where a lot of Jewish people settled. Edgware, Mill Hill, Hendon, Golders Green, and my parents. That was my first home, so it was a block of flats. I was born in 1945, so just the end of the Second World War. The block of flats was bombed during the war, and there was a unexploded bomb that was in the middle of the block of flats. And then when I was 8 years old, my parents moved to Mill Hill. We moved up a notch, so to speak. We moved from a flat to a detached house in Mill Hill, which my mother was thrilled about. My father was a retailer. He had to leave school when he was 13, and my mother left school at 13 as well. They both met one another at school, I think when they were about 11 or 12 years old, and they eventually got married and lived together until the day that my father died, which was in 1989. So I was born in 1945. I had a brother who died, older brother called Michael, who died what they call was a dry birth in 1944. So my mother gave birth to me at some risk to her own health. So I don't think she could have any more children after she had me, and even having me was a risk for her. And my father, when he left school, he did a lot of strange things in the East End of London. Both my parents, before we moved to Queensborough Court and Henley's Corner and then Mill Hill, were born and bred in the East End of London. My father's parents came from, we think, the Ukraine in 1899. We found a marriage certificate which they had signed with crosses because they didn't speak any English. And the witnesses, there were 4 witnesses to their wedding, and they also signed with crosses. So on my father's side, all his family came, as I say, we think from either Kiev or Lvov, or Kiev or Lviv, as they call it now, which of course figures very prominently in the war in Ukraine at the minute. And then my mother's parents came from Warsaw in Poland. My grandfather and my grandmother came from Romania, from Bucharest, and they came between the wars. So my father's parents came in 1899. My mother's parents came between the wars to London, and my mother and father were born and bred, as I said, in the East End of London. Left school when they were 13. My mother worked as, I think, as secretary and in various offices. My father, I think, started trying to do something legally. Had no legal training, but he tried to help businessmen in court when he was very, very young. Grew a moustache to make himself look a little bit older, and but when he was about, I think, probably 17, having drifted from one job to another, went into radio and television, which was in its infancy, retailing. He started, I think, as a salesman, and then became a manager, then a regional sales manager, ultimately became managing director or chief executive of what was the largest retail radio and television chain in the UK, about 750 stores with brand names J&M Stone, Civic, and Broadmead. It was a division of a conglomerate called Firth Cleveland, which was run by a man called Sir Charles Hayward. And he was a metal basher from Wolverhampton. He owned Wolverhampton Wanderers, the football team, and lived in Jersey, was a tax exile in Jersey, and owned and ran what was one of the first conglomerates on the stock exchange, called London Stock Exchange, called Firth Cleveland. My father ran the retail division. So my sort of childhood was very much two doting parents, because I was an only child. My brother, as I said, had died at birth, so I think probably I was spoilt more than I should have been, but only child of a Jewish family. I had a very good education. My father, not having had any education beyond 13, and my mother too, made sure that I went to a very good, originally I went to a Jewish prep school called Hasmonean, but when we moved from Henley's Corner to Mill Hill, I went to a posher school called Goodwin, which was a feeder to Haberdashers Prep in Mill Hill, which was near where we lived, and then to Haberdashers Senior School at Cricklewood in London, and also which then moved to Elstree, which was nearer where we lived in Mill Hill. So I had a very good primary and secondary education, and then I went to Cambridge from Haberdashers from 1963 to 66. Studied economics, not very well. I got a 2-2, but today that would be, with grade inflation, I would argue probably be a 2-1 or a minor first. That's a bit of a joke. And then went straight to Harvard Business School from 66 to 68. So my parents were very keen, not having had an education of their own, to make sure that I got the best possible education. So that was pretty much my childhood.
So you mentioned a lot about your education. What were your favorite subjects in school?
When I did all the subjects that you do in primary school and prep school and secondary school, because I wanted to go to Cambridge. I was very keen on going to Cambridge, stimulated, I think, by my father, who wanted me to do that. I focused on, from languages. I'm not very good at languages, but you had to get Latin in those days. In order to get into Oxford or Cambridge, you had to have Latin O level, or use of English, as they called it, and 2 foreign languages. It could be French and Spanish. So I did Latin and French. I failed in my O levels. I failed Latin O level, and in order to get into Cambridge, I had to ultimately, the one condition to getting into Cambridge was getting my Latin O level. I got it. I did it in my final year at Haberdashers. I probably had about, I think it was like 9 or 10 different boards, because you could do different boards for GCSE. So I had London, I had Oxford, I had Cambridge, I had Manchester, I had God knows what the Welsh board. I mean, so I did Latin and French. And then I wasn't great on the sciences. I did physics and chemistry and biology to O level, but I liked maths, but I never did maths part, which I regret. I never did maths past O level. I didn't do AO level, as it was called then, which was midway between O and A level, and I never did A level maths. At A level, I did history, geography, and economics. I didn't really want to do geography, but because of the curriculum at Haberdashers and the timetables, I couldn't. I would like to have done English, economics, and history, but I ended up doing economics, history, and geography. Didn't really like geography. Did okay on it in my A levels. Did okay in economics and in history. Studied with somebody who's now a very famous historian called Simon Sharma, Sir Simon Sharma, well-known historian. He was a friend of mine at Haberdashers. I knew him since he was 13 years old, and we went to Christ's Cambridge together, where he studied history and I studied economics. So the subjects I liked the arts. I liked English, history, geography, maybe not so much. Economics covered economic history, economic theory, British Constitution. So it covered a wide range of subjects. And that's what I did for my A level. Up to A level, I did all the standard subjects. I regret not having done more, as I said, in maths, which today would be more around code. And I regret not doing more in terms of languages. I mean, I get my way through restaurant French, but beyond restaurant French, my languages are, I can read ancient Hebrew, not so much modern Hebrew, but Hebrew was also a language that I studied for my bar mitzvah and a little bit beyond. But I regret not having done, my advice to you're in Singapore, so I assume you speak Chinese.
We're learning it, but not that. We're not good.
Well, I am. If we're learning, and I have to rate how good I am at Chinese, I would be minus 100.
If I can give you some advice, Chinese and code, those would be the
Please do.
two languages that I would. And I'm sure that Chamonix and Liam are going to learn code and Chinese. So that's a little bit about my and I like sport. I played cricket, played rugby, not soccer, but rugby. So played a bit of that. Wasn't very good at either. I was very frustrated. I wasn't better at cricket, which I dearly love. But
I like cricket very much.
what do you do? What are you, batsman, bowler, or both?
Normally I like batting more.
All right.
You said you were keen on Cambridge because of your father. What were some highlights of your experience in Cambridge?
I actually didn't use my time in Cambridge as well as I should have done. I think I have 3 sons and they all went to Cambridge actually, and they managed their time much better. I noticed when they were there, they managed their time much more effectively than I did. I didn't manage my time well. I lived in college for 1 year and in digs, as they called it, for 2 years. And the thing I regret about Cambridge is I really didn't organize my time as well as I should have. I worked very hard. I got a 2-2, which is a lower second degree. So it goes first class, 2-1, 2-2, third, and then fail. So I was very much in the middle of the pack. And what I was always predicted to get a 2-1, but always failed to. Worked like a dog, but never managed to get it together. I don't think I was particularly good at synthesizing into essay form good answers. But I did work very hard, but I didn't manage to organize. I played a little bit of cricket there, a little bit of rugby. Christ Cambridge were very good at cricket and rugby, provided I think it was 6 of the first cricket 11 of the Blues, the Cambridge Blues, and I think 9 of the first rugby 15. So they were very much a sports orientated college and very, very good at history. I had a very famous professor there called Jack Plum, who ultimately became master of the college too, and taught Simon Sharma, was very, very important historian. So I think the answer to your question, Chamonix, is that I didn't really organize my time. When I went to Harvard, I went straight to business school after Cambridge. I was one of the what was described, it was the most naive class at the Harvard Business School. It was the time of the Vietnamese War. So a lot of Americans were being drafted straight into the army, and to avoid the draft, a lot of American men, mostly men at that time at the B school, there were very few women there at that time, sadly. And at that time, to avoid the draft, many of them would go straight to graduate school. So the average age was much lower. So I was 21, 22 when I went to Harvard, which is a little bit lower because they like to have people, because it's the case study method of teaching, where you have cases that you read. They like you to have experience, and I didn't have the experience. So I was a bit atypical in a way, but I loved my time at Harvard. I was much better organized. It was a trade school rather than an academic school. So I felt that a lot of what I was doing was practically good for what I was going to do from a career point of view. So I would say, coming back to your question, I didn't organize myself well at Cambridge. I think at Harvard I did much better. I was in the top third of the class there, but everybody says they were in the top third. So it's the only place in the world where everybody's in the top third. But no, I enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. A lot of teaching method, as I said, was case studies, which meant that a lot of your grades, instead of being determined by exams, were determined by day-to-day classroom participation. You had case studies which you had to read 3 a night. You did 3 a night. And then the following day, you'd have 3 sessions around those 3 case studies. So you had to be well prepared for them. And because it was talking in class as well as writing, it probably was good for me in being able to articulate verbally thoughts around a case as well as writing detailed analysis. So I think I got more out of Harvard than I did out of Cambridge, and I regret that I didn't spend my time more effectively at Cambridge. Maybe if I'd done a gap year. I didn't do any gap year because the tradition at that time, or the usual, was to you get your place at university and you go away for a year, traveling, maybe South America, North America, Asia, whatever. Not so much China at that time because China hadn't opened up then. But you would go traveling a bit and get a bit of more maturity, and I didn't do that. But at Harvard, I think I got a lot out of it.
So, do you have any advice or anything on how to manage your time better?
Well, it's a good question. I think, when I look at my own kids, or indeed my grandkids, because I have 7 grandkids now, and some of them are starting to do, the eldest is about 16, 17. So they're looking at doing their sort of starting to think about their A levels and university entrance and everything. And I think I've noticed they manage their time much better. I think the answer to your question is, think about how you allocate your time to your studies, other areas of activity. They can be societies, sports, interests, whatever. So I think really learning to organize yourself, and the world is very different today for you than it was for me. I mean, we had no internet. Communication was relatively slow. If you wanted to communicate with somebody, you would write them a letter. If you were in office, you would maybe dictate a letter. It would then be typed and then sent. I mean, the pace of life has quickened. So organizing your time, allocating your time to what you do and how you do it has become even more important, I think, when I was there. So I think you have to think through what your objectives are, think through about what you want to do, what you want to do from a work point of view, from a social point of view, sports point of view, what you want to do from a society point of view. You might want to get involved in causes around any area of activity. So I think organizing yourself is really extremely important, particularly in the environment in which we live in now.
Can you describe a favorite childhood memory?
Well, I can remember going to the office. Going to school. My father, as I said, was a very successful retailer. He would take me to, so the school, Haberdashers, was in Cricklewood. We lived in Mill Hill. My father used to travel to South London every day, to Putney. It would take him about an hour across London. He had a chauffeur-driven car. It was a very posh car, posh to me anyway. It was a Daimler 104. They don't make them anymore. and he had a chauffeur in uniform, and I was always very embarrassed about being driven to school with my father in the back of the car. So I used to run into the school very quickly every morning. Used to get to school about 8:15 in the morning. Used to leave home about 7:30, 7:45. So I remember that. I remember, I would come home in the afternoon on the 113 bus, which used to go from near where the school was in Cricklewood to Mill Hill, and I would be reading the financial. I used to read the Financial Times when I was very young, when I was about 13 or so. I used to read the Financial Times on the bus on the way home. So those are memories. Remember playing cricket there, both in the old sports fields we had, which were in Mill Hill actually, and in the new one when we moved out to Elstree. Remember, when I was a prefect at school, taking Jewish prayers. I used to take Jewish prayers every day, and we used to file into the General Assembly where the Christian prayers were. So I remember all those things.
Even the Financial Times when you were like 13, so around our age. Does that mean from like a pretty young age you were interested in finance?
Yes, I think because of my father and because of what, he used to work as 7 days a week. And on a Saturday, he would be talking to his regional sales managers and getting the figures back from them about what was happening on the sales. And then he would, on a Sunday, we would often go off in his car to look at new retail sites. And my father had as I said, no formal education, but he was really interested in design. And he was a initiator, a developer of what we call flush front retailing. So retail shops had two windows, and then you had a corridor that you went down the windows and then into the shop. What my father did was actually, under the Civic brand, is create new concepts in design. And he had no architectural knowledge, but he had a flair for design and marketing. And so he created these flush fronted stores. These were all glass in the front. You had the walkway in, but the door was at the front. The two windows were there. I always remember that. I remember getting a job as a salesman in Harlesden in one of his stores. He gave me my first job when I was about 15 or 16. So I was a salesman in a store selling radios and TVs and fridges and record players. And then I went into the hire purchase department. In those days, you had a form of financing called hire purchase, where people put a deposit down and then paid installments of interest and capital. So repaying the loan. So he gave me my break in my earliest jobs.
What do you wish you knew when you were our age, like a teen or younger?
Well, that's really difficult to answer because you really wish you had perfect foresight. But I think the big difference between when I was brought up and as you're being brought up is that the pace of activity is so rapid, and the pace of change is so rapid that this is somewhat, it's not philosophical, but it's a deep question, I think, from an economic point of view. I think change is so inherent to the system. What my father's advice to me was, find an industry that you love, find a company within that industry that you love, build a reputation at that company. And if you want to do something on your own, entrepreneurially, go off and do it. And that's effectively what I did. I followed his advice. But he always said, build businesses for the long term. And I'm not sure that in today's environment, building for the long term, that change is so rapid. If you look at big companies in the S&P 500 or the FTSE 100 or the Fortune 500, whatever it is, you'll see that the volatility there is very significant. So companies rise and fall, brands rise and fall at a remarkably rapid rate. I think McKinsey say the average company stays in the big indices probably for about 12 years. So I think the thing that I think is really interesting is things have become much more volatile. And my father's advice to me about building a business, for the long term, may not be. It's not something that I followed his advice. I've been involved with Sarches, I've been involved with WPP, I've been involved with S4 Capital. And that spanned a period of 50 plus years. So, I've gone for long-term brand building, which I still believe in. I wonder whether that's necessarily the right thing. Maybe the right thing is you develop ideas, you develop them in their early stages. You might take them on to a later stage, but you then sell or evolve into a different structure. So I think pace of change is so rapid, and the world, you're growing up in a world which is much more fragmented than, with the problems that we face with US and China and their relationships or lack of relationships, the problems we have with Russia, obviously in the Ukraine, but the Russian issue is not just around the Ukraine, it's much more long-term than that. That will be long-term, but much more long-term. And then Iran, those are the three big problems. There are other problems. You're sitting in Singapore, so North Korea obviously is high up the agenda, but there are so many issues that we have to do on a worldwide basis. And frankly, maybe it's because I'm getting older, I find resolution of those problems difficult to imagine. I don't see how the US and China are going to coexist effectively as they have done over the last 50 years. I don't see how you solve the Russian problem. Even if you had regime change, you may get somebody even worse than Putin running Russia. And then finally, Iran, we may see regime change in Iran, unlikely in my view, but we may do. But again, there's so much volatility. And I think sadly, countries are now turning in on themselves. Like this morning, we hear that America is going to put further restrictions on investment or working with major Chinese tech companies. So the pressures, I don't want to depress you. I can't see, it's the first time in my life that I can't feel comfortable with some of the political developments. I mean, I've lived in the last 50 years at Sarches and at WPP and S4, at least until recently, in a world which is becoming increasingly globalized, increasingly integrated, increasingly brought together. I'm not sure that is a world that, I hope it's a world that you will experience, but I'm not sure it's going to be the same.
So I picked up on the fact that earlier you said, I think you said your dad told you that to find an industry you like and find a company in that industry you like. Would you say WPP was one of those companies? Because you were kind of in the advertising.
He said, you build a reputation at that company, and if you want to start something on your own, you start it. And I think he used to say to me, do that when you're 40 years old, because 40 years old is a really interesting point where you're midway through your career. It's not the case now. I mean, with the elongation of life, please God, you will live, both of you, well beyond 100. The halfway house is not 40. So, the old days, you would start when you were 20, you'd retire when you were 60. That was the idea. And, halfway was 40. So let's say it's now 40 or 50. What my dad said was, find the industry you love, find the company that you love, build a reputation. And then if you want to do something on your own, entrepreneurially go off and do it on your own. WPP was that. So I found an industry, advertising and marketing services, by accident. It wasn't something that I I met somebody who had an investment in a major agency, and that agency was Saatchi's, and I then became the CFO. I was there for 9 years. We were very successful. We became the industry leader. And then at the age of 40, I found this shell company called Wire and Plastic Products, which was capitalized at less than £1 million. And 33 years later, it was worth £16 billion. So we built. It was a company with at the top of it 200,000 people, directly or indirectly employed, and with major clients like Ford and Unilever and Google and Nestle and Colgate and all sorts of companies doing advertising and marketing services. So I fell into it almost by accident, because the guy I was working for, James Gulliver, had an interest in the agency that became Saatchi's. I met the Saatchi brothers. They said they needed a CFO. I became CFO. I was CFO for 9 years, built a reputation, and then went off. So the answer to your question, Shamini, is that WPP was the entrepreneurial representation of what I'd done. I left WPP in 2018. I'm 78 now. So I left when I was 73, and we started S4 Capital, which is another shell company. It was nothing. We, just like WPP, was a manufacturing company. S4 Capital had nothing, and today we have 9,000 people in 32 countries.
Can you tell us about what an advertising, marketing, and PR company like S4 Capital does?
It tries to identify what a consumer's needs and wants are. And that consumer can be you as a consumer, your mom, your dad, your family, whatever it happens to be. It can be, what we call business to business. It can be you're working inside a company. What does your company want? What services do your company want? What products? What services? It can be government. You could be in government, and we could call it business to government. What do government departments want from an advertising and marketing point of view? But the purpose of it is to identify what consumers want and when they want it, and to respond to those needs. They can be emotional needs. They can be physical needs. They can be products. They can be services. So really, the role of advertising and marketing is to identify what consumers want and when they want them, and provide those goods and services. And it's to stimulate. It's the oil. It's the lubrication for the economy, in my view. Advertising and marketing, identifying what those needs are, those psychological needs, those physical needs. It then moves on to really identifying those needs, identifying those wants, supplying them, and stimulating the growth in the economy as a result. So it really responds to people's desires and needs and wants. And at the same time, by identifying and providing those, it stimulates growth in the economy.
In your career and life, did you ever have a challenge that made you doubt yourself, and how did you manage to overcome it?
Well, I think everybody does, whether they admit it or not. You do. I think every day you think about whether you can achieve something or you can't. So I think everybody, if anybody says, I never had any doubts or I never had any concerns, the real issue, I think, Leon, is how you go about responding to that. There will be these challenges. Do you run away from them? Do you confront them? Or as my father used to say, if you face 10 issues, well, not just issues, opportunities, pick them off one by one, deal with them one by one. You may have tasks that look very daunting. You may have problems. Everybody has issues they deal with. That's life. you have at a point in time, when you're on your own, when you're married, when you have a family. I mean, all the challenges and the issues are very different. But we all face, there will be good times, and then the moment there are good times, you face difficult times. Life is inherently cyclical. So I think the answer is a bit like your question about managing your time. I think you have to take a rational, steady approach and sort out the issues and the problems one by one, or the opportunities. It shouldn't just look at it in a negative sense. Look at it in a positive sense. The opportunities and all the problems one by one, and see the way through them. Nothing is impossible. I remember at Saatchi's, Morris and Charles Saatchi used that all the time, and I think that's true. Nothing is impossible. No challenge is impossible. No opportunity is impossible to capitalize on, as long as you think carefully through what you have to do.
You were working as a CFO at Saatchi & Saatchi and conducted many acquisitions for them. How did that work lead you to discover the business opportunity behind building what became WPP?
With Saatchi's, we had a base. I went in there in 1977, stayed there until 1985. I was a consultant to them from 75 to 77. And they had a base of business. With WPP, it was a manufacturing business. It was what we call a shell company. And we wanted to build a major advertising and marketing services company. With S4 Capital, we started with nothing. I literally put some money into a private company and then made an acquisition. So the answer, Shamini, to your question is, acquisitions were always very important, because the base business we had at Saatchi's, we were very ambitious. We wanted to create a world leader. With WPP, we started with nothing. It was a wire basket manufacturer. We used to make wire baskets. So we wanted to build an advertising and marketing services company. So it was a stock market vehicle to building a business. And with S4 Capital, I had money that I wanted to invest. And I knew, or the advertising and marketing services industry, in this particular case of S4, it's purely digital. So it's capitalizing on the growth of Alphabet or Google or Meta and Facebook and Instagram and Apple and Microsoft and everybody else. So we were capitalizing on that. But I think behind all three lives, there are two things that are really important. The first is geographical growth. In all three cases, we built businesses in North and South America, in Europe, and in Asia Pacific, in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and Asia Pacific. So it is about the growth of globalization, which, as I said to you before, is being checked at the moment. So that's one thing. And then the other trend is the growth of technology. Technology becoming more and more important in the advertising and marketing services industry. So those are the two trends. And the first trend, was very much about Saatchi's. We created advertising, very famous advertising for British Airways called Manhattan Landing, with, I think it was Ridley Scott was the producer of that. He started, great film producer, but started in advertising. Whereas maybe it was Hugh Hudson, one of those. And it was about the growth of global advertising. There was a famous professor at Harvard Business School called Ted Levitt, marketing professor, said everybody will consume things in the same way everywhere. And that's really what happened with marketing and the growth and globalization of it. That's now in check. And then around the early 90s, mid-1990s, we started to see the growth of the internet. And it's the technology bucket, which really has driven the growth that we've seen in our industry too, with the six big platforms: Google, Facebook, Amazon in the West, Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok ByteDance in the East. Those are the 6 big platforms that drive advertising and marketing services and technology. So in your lives, I think geographical fragmentation, you're going to have to pick more carefully where you live and where you work. You know, in my life, or from the majority of my life, it didn't matter. Wherever you went, there was growth. I think it's going to be much more selective. And in your life, technology is the changes that you're going to see. For example, AI is the latest iteration. The metaverse and Web 3.0, as it's called, was the previous one, or is ongoing. These are things that are going to shape your life. That's why I think code and Chinese are so important. You know, if the two of you, I'd be getting out my Chinese textbooks, and I've been getting out my code textbooks. Toot sweet.
We tried creating a script for a video ad with ChatGPT, and ChatGPT did a pretty good job.
Absolutely. I asked it to produce an ad for a Tesla Model S, and it did a pretty good job.
We could make the script more inspiring, more impactful, or more dramatic by just telling ChatGPT to do so.
I suppose you could say to ChatGPT, can't you do better than that? You know, you see what their script is, and then you say, come on, go on, you can do better than that. And what will happen is it will get better, because the more data that ChatGPT or any Bard or whoever ingests, the more data they have and the more experiences they have. It's like your mind, the human mind. The more experiences the human mind has, the better it gets. So it's going to develop even further. Watch out. You know, it's learning code and Chinese faster than you.
It's all of human knowledge combined.
Yes.
I've tried to play ChatGPT chess. It does not it does not know how to play.
Well, Watson is the IBM AI, and you know, I think Watson. I'm trying to remember whether Watson defeated the chess masters. I mean, Watson plays chess, and it's also, what is that Chinese game? I can't remember what it's called. You know, that Chinese mind game as well, like chess but different. Where Watson, again, this is years ago. This is not recently. Years ago, defeated, I think, the Chinese grandmaster in that particular game too. I'm trying to remember what it's called. So the answer is, these machines will become more and more proficient. They will take jobs away. They will free up time for you and me to do other things. So it will be constructive, but it will also be destructive. And of course, the other thing to worry about is, in the hands of unscrupulous people, bad actors, as we call them, there can be some tough stuff. So we have to be careful.
Effective marketing is all about reaching your target audience with a precise message. Today, companies can reach a very specific audience because Facebook and Google have a lot of information on our interests. Do you think it's a good thing because less advertising money is being wasted, or do you think it's a bad thing because sometimes people could feel like they're being spied on?
Well, both points are valid. And so you had to, like everything in life, you had to balance things. I think, particularly with AI, I'm just in the process of writing an article, actually, on the effectiveness of AI. And I think what we will get with AI is what we call hyper-personalization. So we will be able to identify even more effectively than we do now what things you're interested in, Shamini or Leon, or your parents or your family or whatever. We'll be able to identify more effectively. But at the same time, the other issue that you raise, which is people finding it creepy that, you know, they're getting into my brain or your brain, we have to watch out for that too. So we have to do it in a way that doesn't make people feel as though it's creepy, doesn't make people feel as though it's invasive, intrusive, and that maintains people's privacy but it can be extremely effective. I mean, if I can identify, let's say you're moving house, and I can provide you with all the things that you need to move house. It might be new furnishings, it might be new carpets, curtains, whatever. It may be removal services. It may be identifying a property, finding the most, if I can do that in an effective way, that can be pretty effective. So the answer is getting a balance into it, not doing it so it's intrusive or invasive, but with this device, which is a phone, which I have, we're probably going to be able to tailor some really interesting personal experiences. Let's say you want to buy some clothes. You have your phone in front of you, and we can show you what you will look like in those clothes, whether they fit you, whether they don't, and you just press a button and it's ordered and delivered. So it's there are some things going to happen from tailoring to individual needs that will be extremely effective.
You've been in the advertising business for a long time. How do global trends affect the advertising industry?
Well, there are two, as I said, Leon, there are two things. There's geographic, in my view, to try and simplify it. Geographic trends. So the trend was to more globalization. It's reversing. So it's now to be more localization and picking your markets much more effectively. So today, to me, North and South America offer a lot of promise. The Middle East offers a lot of promise, and Asia. Question mark on China, because the concerns around Taiwan and the security of Taiwan, if you have a big position in China, a big market position, do you want to increase your market position significantly when there are problems? So you've got to look at things much more through a much more careful lens. So that's one set of issues. The other is the growth of technology. We're just talking about AI. The country that, in my view, has the biggest advantage in AI is China. That is going to throw up a lot of issues for people to get their minds around, because if America and China are going to increasingly come into conflict, which I think they are, and God forbid that could, in theory, end up in some form of military conflict. If they do come increasingly into conflict, AI is going to be one of the weapons. For example, I saw an article that a drone was more effective at aircraft combat than a human-driven plane. A drone could twist and turn much more effectively, driven by AI, than a piloted plane, where if you make a tight turn, a pilot can black out. That wasn't the case with AI-driven drone. So you're going to see differences in the way that people execute technologically, and that's going to become really interesting. I mean, for example, the medical operations now are being done remotely. They're being done on the metaverse. AI robots are performing operations even more effectively than humans. So you are going to see some enormous positives from this revolution that's taking place. And obviously, as I said, there will be bad actors, and there will be political consequences that make life more difficult. So it's going to be much more nuanced. In my time, the tide was with you. In your time, I think you're going to have to be much more selective, and there are going to be huge challenges in the application geography and technology.
If we could press a button and change anything in the world, what would it be?
Well, I think that, the climate issues are huge and really worrying. So I think if I could press a button, it was be in relation to that. If you see the extreme effects that climate change are having, I think that's the one thing that I would like to see dealt with. I mean, I'd like to see the US and China getting on. I'd like to see the Russians, put back in their box. I'd like to see the Iranian situation sorted out. I'd like to see North Korea sorted out. Lots of things I would like to see, but I think climate change is the thing that I worry about most, from not my point of view, but from your point of view, from your thing. So that would be one thing.
We recently wrote a graphic novel. How would you advise us to promote it?
So, I would advise you to get a good literary agent. That's the first step. Get yourself a very good literary agent and get him or her to find a publisher. And then I would probably try and promote it on the web. We'll see whether you can do that. Is that the book there in front of you?
Yep.
Good. So how old are you two?
I'm 13. He's
I'm
10.
And what do you want to do, Shamini?
Something to do with computer science and psychology and like AI, human relations and everything with that AI.
Okay. And what about you, Leon?
Space.
Space.
Yes.
What about space? You want to go into space?
Nope.
No. I want to like learn how a rocket works and like build robotics.
Okay, so you're not going to travel on the rocket. You're going to send them up.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you every success, and the most important thing is to look after your mum and dad.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the amazing interview.